Hello and welcome back to another episode. Consider giving us a like and please subscribe to the channel. Let's get started.
Chapter 1. The Letter That Vanished. The fog rolled thick and heavy over Westminster as I stepped out of my club on Pall Mall, drawing my coat tightly around me. It was a wretched evening, the kind that seeped into one's bones and made London feel like a city of ghosts. I had barely taken a few steps when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Dr. Watson," a voice called urgently. I turned to see a tall, anxious-looking gentleman striding toward me, his top hat askew and his face pale under the flickering gaslight. "You are Dr. John Watson, companion to Sherlock Holmes?" he asked breathlessly. "I am," I replied, studying him with growing curiosity. "And you are?" "Sir Reginald Forsyth, Under-Secretary to the Home Office." He cast a nervous glance over his shoulder. "Forgive my abrupt approach, but I must speak with you and Holmes at once." "It is a matter of national importance," I frowned. "Holmes is not with me at present, but there is no time. I need to see him immediately." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable, though I knew Holmes disliked being disturbed. Unannounced, I had seen enough of life's crises to recognize when protocol must be set aside. "Very well," I said. "Come with me." 15 minutes later, Sir Reginald and I arrived at the opulent Langham Hotel, where Holmes had been attending a private lecture on forensic chemistry given by a visiting German scientist. I knew my friend's interest in such matters, and sure enough, I found him in the dimly lit drawing room, engaged in a spirited discussion with Professor von Steiner. "Watson, you are late," Holmes remarked without turning, and judging by the dampness on your right sleeve, you either brushed against a cab on your way or were in too much of a hurry to notice the rain pooling near the curb. Before I could respond, Sir Reginald stepped forward. "Mr. Holmes, forgive me, but I need your help at once. A document has vanished from my locked office, an impossibility, yet it has happened." Holmes finally turned, his sharp grey eyes narrowing. "An impossibility, you say? Then we must correct that notion immediately." And with that, the game was afoot. Chapter 2. The Impossible Theft. The hansom cab rattled through the mist-laden streets of London as we sped toward Whitehall. Sir Reginald sat opposite Holmes and me, his gloved fingers drumming anxiously against his knee. Despite his obvious distress, Holmes remained composed, his sharp gaze fixed upon our client as though measuring his every twitch and hesitation. "You say the drawer was locked and the seal unbroken when you arrived this morning?" Holmes prompted. "Yes," Sir Reginald confirmed. "I arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, as is my routine. My secretary, Henry Armitage, had already prepared my correspondence. When I unlocked my desk to retrieve the treaty draft, it was gone." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And the last time you saw it?" "Last night, before I locked the drawer myself." "Who knew it was there?" "As I said, only a handful of people. The Prime Minister, 2 other officials in the Home Office, my secretary, and—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "And Count Grigorovich, the Russian envoy. He has been deeply involved in the negotiations." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "And Mr. Armitage, a reliable man, utterly. He has been in my service for 10 years, without a single blemish." "Yet you still suspect him?" Sir Reginald hesitated. "Not exactly, but it seems either he or Count Grigorovich must be involved. Who else could have had the motive?" Holmes exhaled through his nose, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "That, Sir Reginald, is precisely what we shall determine. We arrived at the Home Office to find the building still abuzz with activity despite the late hour. A uniformed guard admitted us, leading us down a corridor lined with heavy oak doors. Sir Reginald's office was a grand yet austere room, its walls lined with dark bookshelves and official documents neatly stacked on a mahogany desk, A gas lamp cast a steady glow over the papers, but it was the desk's central drawer that held our attention. "There," Sir Reginald said, pointing. "That is where the treaty was kept." Holmes examined the drawer carefully, running his fingers over the polished wood. "You are certain no one else has a key?" "Absolutely." With a flick of his wrist, Holmes produced a small magnifying lens and bent closer. "Watson, note this, there is no sign of forced entry, no scratches near the keyhole, no marks upon the seal." I peered over his shoulder, my medical training allowing me to appreciate the precision of his observations. Indeed, the drawer appeared entirely untouched. Holmes straightened, and the cleaners, the guards, anyone who might have entered the office in your absence. The guards change every 4 hours, but none reported anything unusual. Holmes nodded, moving toward the bookshelf. He ran his fingers lightly along the spines of the volumes before turning his attention to the window. It was latched from the inside. He tapped the glass, listening intently, then turned back to us. "Watson, what do you make of it?" I sighed. "It defies logic. If the drawer was locked and untouched, then how could the document have been removed?" Holmes smiled faintly, precisely the question we must answer. At that moment, the door creaked open, and a tall, well-groomed man entered. His dark mustache twitched with irritation as his eyes darted between us. "Sir Reginald, I was not informed of this late-night investigation." "Mr. Armitage," Sir Reginald said, motioning him forward. "This is Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. They are here to assist in recovering the missing treaty." Armitage stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you, I know nothing of the theft." Holmes tilted his head. "Do you, indeed? Then tell me, Mr. Armitage, why is there a faint smudge of red ink on your left cuff when Sir Reginald uses only black ink in this office?" Armitage's eyes widened, and he instinctively glanced at his sleeve. Holmes smiled. "Ah, so we do have something to discuss after all." Chapter 3. The Man with the Red Ink. Armitage recoiled slightly, instinctively brushing at his cuff as though to erase the stain Holmes had pointed out. His composure, though shaken, quickly returned. "I fail to see how a spot of ink on my sleeve is of any consequence," he said stiffly. Holmes gave him a knowing smile. "That remains to be seen. Red ink is uncommon in official documentation, yet you bear a trace of it. That alone is not proof of wrongdoing, but it is an inconsistency, and inconsistencies, Mr. Armitage, are where the truth often hides." Sir Reginald turned to his secretary with an expression of concern. "Henry, if there is anything, you know anything at all, you must tell us." Armitage sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I assure you, sir, I am as baffled as you are. I used red ink earlier today to make a note in my personal ledger, nothing more." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Your personal ledger? Where might we find it?" Armitage hesitated, then walked to a cabinet and withdrew a small leather-bound book. He opened it, flipping through the pages until he found the entry. "Here," he said, pointing. Holmes took the ledger and examined the page. "Watson, observe, the ink is still fresh in places, though the entry is dated for yesterday. Curious." I leaned in. "It suggests the note was either altered or rewritten after the fact." "Precisely." Holmes snapped the book shut and handed it back to Armitage. "Tell me, what was so urgent that you felt the need to amend a record?" Armitage hesitated again, then sighed. "Very well. This morning, before Sir Reginald arrived, Count Grigorovich paid an unexpected visit. He asked for Sir Reginald, and when I told him he was not yet in, he seemed displeased." Holmes' gaze sharpened. "Did he enter this office?" Armitage shook his head. "No. I spoke to him in the corridor. He insisted he had urgent business, and that he would return later." "Did you inform Sir Reginald of this visit?" Armitage looked guilty. No, I saw no reason to at the time. But when the treaty was discovered missing, I thought better of it and made a note of the visit. Holmes nodded, pacing the room with his hands behind his back. A most peculiar detail. The Count arrives unannounced, learns that Sir Reginald is absent, and departs. Only for a crucial document to vanish under impossible circumstances. And yet, the Count never entered the room. I frowned. Then how could he have taken it? Holmes stopped pacing. That, my dear Watson, is precisely what we must determine. Sir Reginald ran a hand through his hair. You suspect Grigorovich. Then, I suspect everyone, Holmes said simply. Guilt is not proven by suspicion, but by evidence. And evidence, I believe, is what we must now seek. He turned sharply toward the door. Come, Watson, a visit to Count Grigorovich is in order. By the time we reached the Russian envoy's residence in Mayfair, the hour was growing late. The stately house was dark save for a single light visible through the drawing-room window. Holmes rang the bell, and after a long pause, the door was opened by a severe-looking butler. His Excellency is not receiving visitors at this hour, the man said in a thick accent. Holmes smiled. Oh, but he will make an exception for Sherlock Holmes. The butler's face twitched slightly at the name. Wait here. Moments later, we were ushered inside. The drawing-room was richly furnished, with thick velvet, curtains and heavy mahogany furniture. Count Grigorovich sat in a deep leather chair, a glass of brandy in one hand, a cigar smouldering in the other. His dark eyes gleamed as he studied us. Mr. Holmes, he said smoothly, I had not expected a visit from you. Holmes inclined his head. I imagine not. And yet, here we are. The Count gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Holmes ignored the offer. I shall be brief, Count. This morning, you paid an unscheduled visit to Sir Reginald's office. Grigorovich exhaled a stream of smoke. Is that a crime? Holmes smiled. Not at all. But shortly after, an important document vanished under impossible circumstances. I find that rather more interesting. The Count's expression did not change, but his fingers tapped idly against his glass. And you suspect me? I suspect a great many things, Holmes said. Perhaps you could enlighten us as to the nature of your visit. The Count took a slow sip of brandy before answering. I wish to discuss a certain amendment to the treaty. A minor detail, but one of significance to my government. And yet you did not wait for Sir Reginald's arrival. Grigorovich shrugged. Time is precious, Mr. Holmes. Holmes regarded him for a long moment. Indeed, the silence stretched between them like a drawn blade. Then Holmes turned abruptly. Come, Watson. We have learned all we can for now. As we stepped back into the cold night air, I turned to Holmes. Do you believe he took it? Holmes' eyes glittered in the lamplight. I believe, Watson, that the Count is playing a game. The question is, what are the stakes? Chapter 4. A Puzzle Without Pieces. The chill of the night clung to us as we made our way back from the Russian envoy's residence. Holmes walked briskly, his head slightly bowed, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his overcoat. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, but curiosity gnawed at me. You believe Grigorovich is involved, I said finally. Holmes did not break stride. In some capacity, yes. But that does not yet make him our thief. But he was there, Holmes, at the very place and time the document vanished. Surely, that cannot be coincidence. Holmes chuckled softly. Ah, Watson, how many times must I tell you? The universe is full of coincidences. Our task is to determine whether this is one of them. He stopped abruptly, turning toward me with a glint in his eye. No, what troubles me most is not the Count's presence, nor his evasiveness, nor even his undisguised amusement at our questions. Then what? Holmes sighed. The complete absence of a method. If Grigorovich or anyone had stolen the treaty, there must have been a means by which they accomplished it. And yet, I see none. The lock drawer. Holmes nodded. Precisely. The laws of logic dictate that if something has been removed from a sealed compartment, then either the compartment was not truly sealed, or the item was never inside it to begin with. I frowned, but Sir Reginald swore that he locked the document away. Holmes resumed walking. Which is why we are missing something. The question is, what? We arrived back at Baker Street just after midnight. Mrs. Hudson, ever a light sleeper, peered out from the staircase as we entered. Another late-night case, Mr. Holmes. Holmes gave her a weary smile, a rather vexing one. Mrs. Hudson. She nodded knowingly. Well, I've put out some fresh tea. You'll find it still warm. Holmes inclined his head in gratitude, a kindness, as always. As we settled into our sitting room, Holmes lit his pipe and sprawled into his armchair, staring into the fire. I poured myself a cup of tea, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he murmured, "We're chasing a ghost, Watson, a ghost, a theft without an entry, a crime without a means. It is as if the document simply ceased to exist." He exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke. "And yet, that cannot be. Matter does not vanish. It only changes form." I leaned forward. "Then the document must still be somewhere." Holmes smiled faintly. "Exactly." At that moment, there was a sharp rap at the door. "Who on earth?" I muttered, but Holmes was already on his feet. He opened the door to reveal Inspector Lestrade, his expression grim. "Holmes, we have another problem." Holmes stepped aside to let him in. "Another problem, or another crime?" Lestrade hesitated. "That depends. Sir Reginald Forsyth is dead." A silence fell over the room, thick as the fog outside. I set my teacup down with a sharp clink. "Dead, murdered," Lestrade corrected. "Stabbed in his own home not an hour ago." Holmes' face remained unreadable, but I saw his fingers twitch slightly a sign. I knew, that's his. Mind was already racing ahead. Lestrade folded his arms. "And here's the strangest part, his study was locked from the inside." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Another impossibility." "My dear Lestrade, you do know how to make a case interesting." Chapter 5. The Locked Room Mystery. Lestrade's pronouncement hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Holmes, who had been reclining in his chair only moments before, now stood rigid, his sharp gaze locked onto the inspector. "A locked room murder," he murmured, his voice betraying a flicker of excitement. "And only an hour ago, you say, Watson. Our night is not yet over." I grabbed my coat, while Holmes reached for his hat and cane. "Where did it happen?" he asked, briskly. "At Forsyth's townhouse in Kensington," Lestrade replied as we hurried downstairs. His butler found him locked inside his study, a knife in his chest. No sign of forced entry, no open windows, no secret passages, just a corpse and a locked door. Holmes smiled thinly. "Fascinating." When we arrived at Sir Reginald's house, the atmosphere was thick with unease. A small crowd of constables loitered outside, while the butler, a pale, elderly man, wrung his hands anxiously at the entrance. "This way, gentlemen," Lestrade said, leading us into the house. We ascended the grand staircase, the polished wood gleaming under the flickering gas lamps. At the top of the stairs, he stopped before a heavy oak door. "This is the study," Lestrade said. "We had to break the lock to get in." Holmes examined the door carefully. A sturdy lock, no tampering, no scratches. "The key was inside, I presume?" Lestrade nodded. "In his pocket." Holmes pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene before us was grim. Sir Reginald slumped in a large leather chair, his lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. A silver-handled dagger protruded from his chest, the blade buried deep. Papers lay scattered across the desk. and a faint scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air. Holmes strode forward, eyes darting over the room. "Watson, your medical opinion?" I bent over the body, examining the wound. The blade punctured the heart. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Judging by the lack of struggle, I'd say he never saw it coming. Holmes nodded, then crouched by the floorboards. He pressed his fingers against the wood, then straightened. "The dust here is undisturbed. No one hid beneath the desk, no footprints leading to the walls or windows." He moved toward the window and inspected the latch. "Sealed from the inside." I frowned. "Then how could the killer have left?" Holmes turned to Lestrade, who discovered the body. "The butler, Jenkins. He says he knocked on the door several times before forcing it open and..." Finding the body, Holmes stroked his chin. "Summon him." A few moments later, Jenkins entered, his face still ashen. "Mr. Holmes, it's horrible. Who could have done such a thing?" "That is precisely what we intend to discover," Holmes said. "Tell me, Jenkins, when did you last see Sir Reginald alive?" "Around 10 o'clock, sir. He was in his study, as usual." "And you heard nothing unusual?" Jenkins hesitated. "Only. I thought I heard him talking to someone." Holmes' eyes sharpened. "A visitor?" "I don't know, sir. I didn't hear another voice, just his." He sounded distressed. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "And when did you find him?" "Just before midnight. I knocked, but he didn't answer. The door was locked, so I fetched the footman and together we forced it open. And then I saw him like this." Holmes clasped his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. "One final question, Jenkins. Where is Sir Reginald's pocket watch?" The butler blinked. "His watch, sir. Why?" "He always kept it on his desk." Holmes moved swiftly to the desk, sweeping aside the scattered papers. A small indentation on the polished surface suggested something had once rested there. "The watch is missing," Holmes murmured. "And that, gentlemen, is the first real clue." Lestrade scoffed. "What's a missing watch got to do with murder?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That remains to be seen. But tell me, Lestrade, if a man is murdered in a locked room, and the only thing missing is his watch, does it not suggest that the time of death is itself part of the deception?" Lestrade frowned. "You think the murder didn't happen at midnight?" Holmes turned back to the body. "That is exactly what I think." Chapter 6. The Vanishing Hour. Holmes stood motionless, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the dimly lit study. Lestrade, arms crossed, watched him impatiently. "You mean to say the time of death is wrong?" Lestrade asked. "Precisely." Holmes gestured towards Sir Reginald's body. "Watson, you estimated death occurred around midnight. But what if I told you our victim died much earlier?" I frowned. "That would require an external factor, perhaps a cooled room or some deliberate manipulation of the scene." Holmes smiled approvingly. "Very good, Watson. And that is precisely what I intend to uncover." He turned back to the butler, Jenkins. "Tell me, when you knocked on the door at midnight, was there any response at all?" "No, sir," Jenkins said. "Not a sound. And before that, you mentioned hearing Sir Reginald's voice at 10. Are you certain he was alone?" Jenkins hesitated. "Now that I think about it, he was speaking in a strange way, sir, as if he were giving instructions, but I never heard another person answer." Holmes' gaze flickered with interest. "Was the voice calm?" Jenkins shook his head. "No, sir," he sounded uneasy. Holmes tapped his fingers against the desk. "Uneasy, but not in distress." "No, sir," Holmes nodded. "That confirms my suspicion." Lestrade sighed. "And what suspicion is that?" Holmes turned to the body. "Sir Reginald's watch is missing. That watch would have provided us with the precise time of death had the murderer not taken it." Lestrade scoffed. So you think the killer stole the watch just to mislead us? Holmes smiled thinly. No, Inspector. I think the killer stole the watch because it would reveal something they desperately wish to hide. I stiffened. You mean Sir Reginald had set the time of his own death? Holmes pointed at me with his pipe. Precisely. Watson. Our victim likely checked his watch before his murderer struck. If he had the habit of noting the time, say, in a diary or journal, then that missing watch could be the one thing that contradicts the supposed timeline of events. Lestrade exhaled sharply. And what are you suggesting? That he was killed before 10? Not before 10, Holmes said. But shortly after. A heavy silence filled the room. I stepped toward the desk, sifting through the scattered papers. If he was keeping track of time, there may be a record somewhere. Holmes joined me, moving with a sharp efficiency. He flipped through the sheets with his long fingers, pausing over a folded letter. His eyes darkened as he read. Watson, he murmured, handing me the paper. This is interesting. I unfolded it and scanned the words. If I do not return the document by midnight, I am as good as dead. There are forces at play, beyond my control. I looked up in shock. Holmes. He knew he was in danger. Holmes nodded gravely. And he believed his life depended on that missing treaty. Lestrade snatched the note. But this doesn't tell us who killed him. No, Holmes admitted, but it tells us why. He turned abruptly and strode toward the fireplace. There, among the ashes, a few charred scraps of paper lay partially burned. With delicate precision, he extracted a fragment with the tip of his fingers. Watson, he said, what do you make of this? I examined the fragment. A few blackened letters remained, barely legible. Why at 10:15? Do not. I inhaled sharply. Holmes, is that a time? Holmes nodded. Indeed, Watson. And if I am not mistaken, this note originally recorded Sir Reginald's last appointment. Lestrade's face darkened. So he wasn't alive at midnight. No, Holmes said softly, which means whoever wanted us to believe he was alive at that hour had a very good reason for doing so. The inspector ran a hand through his hair. Then who's our killer? Holmes turned back toward the room, his sharp eyes sweeping over every detail: the dagger, the scattered papers, the locked door. His lips curled into a knowing smile. Oh, Lestrade, he said. The answer has been staring us in the face all along. Chapter 7. The Phantom Alibi. Holmes' declaration left the room in stunned silence. Lestrade shifted uneasily, his brows furrowed. If the answer is so obvious, Holmes, he said gruffly, perhaps you'd care to enlighten us. Holmes leaned against the fireplace, studying the faces before him. Not yet, Lestrade. We must first establish what happened between 10 o'clock when Sir Reginald was last heard alive and midnight, when his body was discovered. He turned to Jenkins. You said Sir Reginald's voice was heard at 10, giving instructions. Did it sound as if he was speaking to someone in the room? Jenkins hesitated. No, sir, more like as if he were dictating something. Holmes nodded. And no one entered or left the study after that? No, sir. The door remained locked. Lestrade groaned. Then how in blazes did the killer get in and out? Holmes tapped his fingers against the mantelpiece. By making us believe they never entered at all. I frowned. You mean the murderer was already inside the room? Possibly, Holmes mused. Or they had another way in, one that did not disturb the door or windows. He moved toward the bookshelves, running his hands along the edges. A study like this often contains hidden compartments or passageways. Watson, help me search. We combed through the shelves, tapping against the wooden panels. After several moments, Holmes stopped abruptly. He pressed against a section of the bookcase, and with a faint click, a narrow gap appeared between the shelves. Lestrade's jaw dropped. A secret passage. Holmes pushed the panel further, revealing a small, dark corridor leading into the walls of the house, indeed, and I would wager our murderer used it to enter and exit the study unseen. Lestrade peered into the passage. Where does it lead? Holmes turned to Jenkins. Are there any adjoining rooms beyond this wall? Jenkins hesitated. Yes, sir. The late Lady Forsyth's old dressing room. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Then we have our answer. We hurried down the hallway to the dressing room. Holmes examined the room carefully. His keen eyes sweeping across the furniture and walls. He moved to the far corner and pressed against the panelling. With another soft click, a section of the wall swung open, revealing the other end of the passage. Lestrade whistled. Well, I'll be damned. The killer could have slipped in and out without ever using the door. Holmes turned to Jenkins, who had access to this room. Jenkins swallowed. Well, sir, Mr. Henry Forsyth often used it. Holmes' expression sharpened. Sir Reginald's nephew? Yes, sir. He's been staying in the house since returning from India last month. Lestrade scowled. The same nephew who stands to inherit everything now that Sir Reginald is dead. Jenkins hesitated, then nodded. Holmes smiled faintly. Curious, isn't it? A secret passage leading directly to the study, and the one person with knowledge of it is the man who benefits most from Sir Reginald's demise. Lestrade cracked his knuckles. Then we have our man. Holmes raised a hand. Not so fast, Lestrade. The presence of the passage only proves means, not guilt. We still need evidence that Henry Forsyth used it tonight. He turned to Jenkins. Where is Mr. Forsyth now? Jenkins' face paled. He left shortly before midnight. Said he was going for a walk. Holmes' smile grew. How convenient. Lestrade, I suggest we find Henry Forsyth before he finds a way to disappear for good. Chapter 8. A Trail in the Fog. We left the study with urgency, stepping into the cold corridors of Forsyth Manor. A heavy stillness hung in the air, broken only by the faint creaks of the aging house. Holmes led the way, with his usual purposeful stride, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. Lestrade turned to Jenkins. Where exactly did Forsyth say he was going? Jenkins wrung his hands. He didn't say, sir. Only that he needed fresh air. Holmes gave a knowing smile. A man does not go for a leisurely stroll moments after his uncle is murdered unless he has a reason to be absent. Lestrade grumbled. So where do we look? Holmes stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed on the thick mist rolling beyond the grand entrance. Watson, I believe a brief excursion in the night air is in order. We stepped outside. The damp chill of the London fog wrapping around us. A single gas lamp flickered dimly at the edge of the Forsyth estate, casting long shadows over the cobblestone path. Holmes crouched, his fingers brushing over the ground. Here, he murmured, fresh footprints. Lestrade peered over his shoulder. Could be anyone's. Holmes smirked, perhaps, but noticed the spacing of the steps, long, purposeful strides. This is not the gait of a man wandering aimlessly. Forsyth is heading somewhere with intent. We followed the footprints through the thickening fog, the city's muffled sounds growing distant. Behind us, Holmes moved swiftly, his silhouette barely visible in the mist. There, he whispered, pointing ahead. A lone figure stood near the docks, half hidden in the shadows of an old warehouse. Henry Forsyth. Lestrade's grip tightened on his revolver. Got you now? Holmes raised a hand. No sudden movements, Lestrade. Let's see what he does. Forsyth glanced around cautiously before slipping into the warehouse. Holmes moved silently to the entrance and pressed himself against the wooden wall. I followed, my heart pounding. Watson, Holmes whispered, are you armed? I nodded and patted my coat pocket. Good. Stay close. Lestrade gestured for his men to spread out, positioning themselves at the exits. Holmes, with a flick of his hand, signaled for us to move in. We stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood and salt. Lantern light flickered against the rafters, casting eerie shadows. Forsyth stood at a wooden crate, rummaging hurriedly through a bundle of papers. Then, as if sensing our presence, he spun around. His eyes widened. Holmes stepped forward. "Looking for something, Mr. Forsyth?" Forsyth's expression twisted. "You don't understand. I had to come here." Lestrade scoffed. "Had to? After your uncle's murder?" Forsyth's hands clenched. "I didn't kill him." Holmes tilted his head. "Then why flee in the dead of night?" Forsyth exhaled sharply. "Because my uncle's death isn't what it seems. There's something bigger at play here." Holmes' gaze sharpened. "Bigger?" Forsyth hesitated, then reached into his coat. In a swift motion, Lestrade and I raised our weapons. But instead of a firearm, Forsyth produced a folded document. He held it out. "This," he said, his voice tight, "is what my uncle died for." Holmes took the paper, his eyes scanning the contents. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Watson," he murmured, "we've been looking at this case all wrong." Lestrade frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes turned to us, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of revelation. "The murder of Sir Reginald Forsyth was never just about money." Chapter 9. A document worth killing for. Holmes held the paper up to the dim lantern light, his eyes flickering across the words with keen intensity. Silence stretched in the cold, damp air of the warehouse. Lestrade shifted impatiently. "Well," he grumbled, "what's in the blasted document?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then, with an almost amused expression, he turned to Forsyth. "Tell me, Mr. Forsyth, how long have you known your uncle was in danger?" Forsyth stiffened. Holmes held up a finger. "No lies, if you please. The truth will serve you better than pretense." Forsyth swallowed, glancing toward the crate he had been searching. "I knew something was wrong when I returned from India. My uncle was unsettled, paranoid, even." Lestrade crossed his arms. "Paranoid about what?" Forsyth exhaled sharply. "I didn't know at first. He was secretive, always locking himself away, receiving late-night visitors. Then, last week, he warned me." "Warned you?" I asked. Forsyth nodded grimly. "He said there were people who would do anything to obtain a certain document. That if anything happened to him, I should find it before they did." Holmes tapped his fingers against his chin. "And you believed him?" "I thought he was being dramatic," Forsyth admitted, "until I heard he was dead." Lestrade scoffed. "So you sneaked out here in the middle of the night to recover it?" Forsyth's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't you?" Holmes chuckled softly. "Indeed, but the question remains, why was Sir Reginald in possession of such a dangerous document?" Forsyth hesitated before answering. "He was involved in something political. Something that extended beyond England." Holmes' eyes gleamed. Now we are getting somewhere." He patted the folded paper in his coat. "This, gentlemen, is no ordinary document. It is a treaty draft." I inhaled sharply. "A treaty?" Holmes nodded. "A highly sensitive one, judging by its contents. If my deduction is correct, this concerns a diplomatic arrangement between Britain and an Eastern power, one that's certain. Factions would be desperate to either secure or destroy." Lestrade's expression darkened. "So you're saying Sir Reginald wasn't just murdered for his fortune?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Lestrade. He was killed because he possessed this." Forsyth looked at Holmes with urgency. "Then you understand why I had to find it. If the wrong hands get hold of it, it could change the course of political relations." Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. Which means your uncle's killer is not merely an opportunistic heir or a vengeful rival. This, my friends, is a matter of espionage. Lestrade cursed under his breath. A spy. You mean to say we've been hunting the wrong kind of murderer? Not entirely, Holmes said. We now know the motive. The next step is determining which of our suspects is more than they seem. He turned to Forsyth. Tell me, did your uncle mention anyone specific he feared? Forsyth hesitated. Then his face darkened. There was one name he repeated often, a man called Vincent Blackwood. Lestrade frowned. Never heard of him. Holmes exhaled slowly. I have. We all turned to him in surprise. Holmes' voice was quiet, but firm. Vincent Blackwood is not an ordinary man. He's one of the most elusive intelligence agents in Europe. A man who deals in stolen secrets, diplomatic sabotage, and when necessary murder. A heavy silence filled the warehouse. Lestrade clenched his fists. Then we need to find this Blackwood fast. Holmes' smile was razor-sharp. No need, Lestrade. He will find us. I swallowed. And when he does, Holmes glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Let us hope we are ready. Chapter 10. The Man in the Shadows. We returned to Forsyth Manor in tense silence, the weight of our discovery pressing upon us. Holmes had barely spoken since leaving the warehouse, his sharp mind clearly piecing together the final pieces of this intricate puzzle. Lestrade, ever impatient, broke the quiet. So, we have a name, Vincent Blackwood. But how do we find him? Holmes smiled faintly. We don't, as I said. He will find us. Forsyth stiffened. You mean he's already watching? Holmes turned to him with an approving nod. Precisely. A man like Blackwood does not leave loose ends. He will already be aware that we have the document, and he will make his move soon. Jenkins, who had remained anxiously silent since our return, stepped forward. Sir, if you believe we're in danger, should we not call for reinforcements? Holmes chuckled. Reinforcements, my dear Jenkins, against a man like Blackwood? No. Amount of constables will make a difference. This must be played strategically. Lestrade folded his arms. And what exactly is your strategy, Holmes? Holmes' eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. We set a trap. An hour later, we sat in Sir Reginald's study, the secret document placed conspicuously upon his desk. The room was dimly lit, the flickering candlelight casting deep shadows along the walls. Holmes had positioned us strategically, Lestrade and his men concealed in the adjoining room. Forsyth and Jenkins sent upstairs, and I seated beside Holmes, revolver in hand. The wait was agonizing. Each creak of the house sent my heart racing. Then, a faint click. Holmes tensed. My grip tightened on my pistol. From the darkness of the passageway, a figure emerged, tall, lean, and dressed impeccably in a dark suit. Vincent Blackwood stepped into the study with the grace of a spectre. His movements were fluid, precise like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. His cold eyes locked onto Holmes. So, Blackwood murmured, his voice smooth and composed, you are the great Sherlock Holmes. Holmes remained utterly still. And you, I presume, are the elusive Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood's lips curved into a thin smile. I must admit, you have complicated matters. Holmes inclined his head. It is a talent of mine. Blackwood's gaze flickered to the document on the desk. I assume you know why I am here. Holmes leaned back in his chair. Indulge me. Blackwood sighed, as though mildly inconvenienced. That paper does not belong in your hands. I am here to correct that mistake. Holmes smiled. And if I refuse? Blackwood's expression did not change, but I saw his fingers twitch slightly, subtle, but unmistakable. He was preparing for a violence. Holmes noticed too. In a heartbeat, he moved. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the candle flying from the desk. Darkness swallowed the room. A shot rang out. Lestrade's men burst in. Chaos erupted. I scrambled to my feet, searching for Holmes in the confusion. A shadow lunged toward me. I barely ducked in time. A second shot cracked the air, then silence. A match flared, casting an eerie glow. Holmes stood calmly in the center of the room, revolver in hand. At his feet, Blackwood lay motionless, his weapon knocked aside, his breathing ragged. Lestrade stepped forward, his own gun drawn. "Is he?" Holmes nudged Blackwood's arm with his foot. Alive, but not going anywhere, Forsyth emerged from the hallway, his face pale. "It's over." Holmes dusted off his coat. "It is now." Lestrade knelt beside Blackwood, securing him in irons. "Well, Holmes, I suppose I must thank you, though I wish you'd warned me about the gunplay." Holmes smirked. "Where would the fun be in that?" I exhaled deeply, my pulse finally slowing. "And what now?" Holmes retrieved the document from the desk and handed it to Forsyth. "Now, this goes to the proper authorities where it should have been all along." Blackwood stirred, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. This changes nothing." Holmes gazed down at him with mild amusement. "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood, it changes everything." Chapter 11. The Final Move. The morning light filtered through the curtains of 221B Baker Street as I sat at my desk, pen in hand, recounting the events of the previous night. Blackwood had been taken into custody, and the stolen document was now in the hands of the Foreign Office. The case was solved, or so it seemed. Yet, as Holmes sat in his armchair, staring into the crackling fire, I sensed an unusual restlessness in him. His fingers tapped absently against the armrest, his sharp gaze distant. "You are troubled, Holmes," I observed. He exhaled softly. "Not troubled. Watson, merely reflective." I set down my pen. "The case is closed, is it not?" Holmes smirked. "In the sense that Blackwood has been arrested, yes. But a man like him does not act alone." I frowned. "You believe there are others. There are always others, Watson." Holmes leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Blackwood was merely the instrument, not the hand that played him. Someone orchestrated this entire affair, and they remain in the shadows." A knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson entered, looking slightly perturbed. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced. "A government official from the Foreign Office." Holmes and I exchanged a glance before he nodded. "Show him in." A tall, imposing man stepped into the room, his face marked by the weight of responsibility. He removed his hat, nodding curtly. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted. "My name is Sir Edmund Fletcher, Under Secretary of State. I have come regarding last night's affair." Holmes gestured for him to sit. "Ah, yes. I imagine certain officials are rather displeased that such a sensitive matter was nearly lost." Sir Edmund's jaw tightened, to put it mildly. The document contained negotiations that, if exposed, could have severe consequences. "You have done the government a great service, though I fear it is not over." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Sir Edmund sighed. "Vincent Blackwood was found dead in his cell this morning." I sat upright. "Dead? But how?" "Poison," Sir Edmund said grimly. "A substance slipped into his morning tea undetectable until it was too late." Holmes nodded, unsurprised. "Eliminated before he could talk. A predictable move." Sir Edmund hesitated. "Which brings me to my real purpose here." He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope, handing it to Holmes. "This arrived at the Foreign Office early this morning. It bears your name." Holmes took the envelope and examined the seal. Breaking it open, he unfolded the letter and read silently, his lips curled into an enigmatic smile. Well, he murmured, "it seems the true orchestrator wishes to make their presence known." I leaned forward. "What does it say?" Holmes handed me the note. The handwriting was precise, elegant, and chillingly direct. You have removed a pawn, Mr. Holmes, but the game continues until we meet again. No name, no signature, just a challenge. Sir Edmund's expression was grave. Do you have any idea who this might be? Holmes folded the letter carefully. A worthy adversary, no doubt, but one who has now made the fatal mistake of drawing my attention. He stood, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. And rest assured, gentlemen, when the time comes, I shall be ready.